The man standing across from you weighs 220 pounds of pure muscle. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. He has been beaten, starved, and psychologically broken. On purpose. And in 30 seconds, one of you dies in front of 50,000 screaming people. Here's what nobody tells you about gladiators. They weren't slaves dragged from the street. They weren't desperate prisoners begging for mercy. Many of them chose this. And the Roman Empire built the most sophisticated human performance system in the ancient world to create them. This is the truth behind the gladiators, and it is far stranger than anything Hollywood ever showed you. Every movie gets this wrong. You've seen the image 1,000 times. A filthy, terrified slave shoved into a sand-covered arena, handed a broken sword, and told to fight or die. The crowd boos. What the emperor raises his thumb. Blood spills. Entertainment delivered. That version of history is almost entirely false. Archaeological evidence, Roman legal records, and arena logistics all tell a completely different story. Gladiators were not expendable, they were investments. Enormously expensive ones. Training a single gladiator to arena-ready condition took between 1 and 3 years. The food, medical care, housing, and specialized coaching required more resources than training an entire unit of standard Roman soldiers. Arena owners, called lannistai, spent fortunes building these men. Killing them cheaply was financial suicide. This changes everything about how we understand what happened inside those walls. Stay with me, because in about 4 minutes, you're going to discover what gladiators were actually eating. And the answer is so bizarre that modern sports scientists are studying it right now. So, who became a gladiator? The answer splits into 3 groups, and each one tells you something different about Rome. The first group was condemned criminals and prisoners of war. They had no choice. These men were called noxi, the lowest class. They received minimal training, minimal equipment, and minimal survival odds. They were cannon fodder. The second group were slaves, purchased specifically because they showed physical promise. They trained under contracts that could eventually grant them freedom. For a slave in Rome, the arena was one of the only ladders out. But the third group, this is where it gets fascinating. Volunteers, free Roman citizens. Some of them are wealthy, some of them are nobility. Roman records show that men voluntarily signed contracts binding them to a gladiatorial school, surrendering their legal rights, submitting to brutal discipline, and accepting the possibility of death in exchange for fame, money, guaranteed meals, and the most intense psychological rush the ancient world could offer. There were even female gladiators. Roman reliefs found in Halicarnassus show women locked in armed combat in the arena. The Emperor Domitian reportedly hosted midnight gladiatorial bouts, featuring women fighting by torchlight. The arena was not just a death sentence. For the right person, it was a career. Here is where Rome's true genius reveals itself. The gladiatorial schools, called ludi, were not primitive training camps. They were the most advanced athletic facilities in the ancient world. The largest, the Ludus Magnus in Rome, was built directly beside the Colosseum, connected by an underground tunnel. It housed over 2,000 fighters, had its own miniature arena for practice combat, resident doctors, full kitchens, and specialized coaching staff. Different coaches trained different fighting styles, and this is critical. Gladiators were not generic fighters. They were specialists. The Murmillo fought with a large curved shield and a short stabbing sword, a pure defensive tank designed to absorb punishment and counterattack. The Retiarius carried a weighted net and a trident, a speed-based fighter designed to trap, exhaust, and disarm opponents, rather than overpower them. The Thrax used a small curved blade and a tiny shield, designed for rapid slashing combinations against the body. These weren't random weapon assignments. They were engineered matchups, designed specifically so that certain styles countered others. The arena was not chaos. It was a calculated system of human chess, and the men inside it trained 6 to 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, for years. Now, remember I told you something strange was coming? Here it is. Archaeologists in Ephesus, Turkey, excavated a gladiator cemetery in 2014. They analyzed bone samples using isotope testing, a technique that reveals exactly what a person ate over their lifetime. What they found shocked the research team. Gladiators were almost entirely vegetarian. Not by choice, by design. Their diet was dominated by barley, beans, and dried fruit. Roman writers even had a nickname for gladiators, meaning hordiarii, which translates directly as barley men. Why? Why would you feed your most valuable warriors like peasants? Two reasons, both deliberate. First, barley and legumes create rapid glycogen storage. They fuel sustained high-intensity performance, better than meat-heavy diets in conditions of repeated physical exertion. The gladiators were essentially carbohydrate loading every single day. Second, and this one is brutal in its logic, a high carbohydrate diet increases subcutaneous fat, the thin layer of fat just beneath the skin. This fat protects nerves and blood vessels from shallow sword cuts. A gladiator could take a surface wound that would immediately incapacitate a leaner fighter and keep moving. Rome wasn't just feeding its gladiators, it was engineering their bodies to absorb damage. And the medical care that followed those wounds was equally advanced. Which brings us to the most surprising figure in this entire story. His name was Galen, and he is one of the most important figures in the history of medicine. Before he became the personal physician to Emperor Marcus Aurelius, before he wrote 500 medical texts that formed the foundation of European medicine for over 1,000 years, Galen worked as the arena doctor for the gladiatorial school in Pergamon. He called the gladiators his living textbooks, because their wounds gave him something no previous physician had access to: a systematic, repeated view of the human body under catastrophic physical trauma. He observed how muscles tore, how bones fractured and healed, how infections spread and could be stopped. The surgical techniques he developed treating gladiatorial wounds became the medical standard for Roman military surgery, which then spread across an empire covering 3 continents. The gladiator wasn't just entertainment. He was a medical research subject, and the knowledge extracted from his suffering helped save millions of lives across centuries. That fact alone should permanently change how you see what happened in that arena. But we still haven't answered the deepest question, the one that explains why crowds of 50,000 people kept coming back. Here is what Rome truly understood about human beings. We are not rational creatures. We are emotional. And nothing triggers human emotion more reliably than proximity to death. The arena was not just a sporting event. It was a controlled psychological experience, engineered to produce maximum emotional intensity in the viewer. The scheduling was deliberate. Now, executions happened at midday, when the crowd was hungry and restless, as a tension builder. The main gladiatorial bouts arrived in the afternoon, after hours of emotional priming. By the time 2 champions entered the sand, the crowd was in a state of collective arousal that no other entertainment in human history had replicated at that scale. And the gladiators themselves were media products. They had fan clubs. Graffiti in Pompeii named specific fighters alongside commentary about their fighting style and romantic appeal. One inscription calls a gladiator Suspirium Puellarum, the sighing of girls, ancient groupies documented in stone. The best gladiators became household names across the empire. Their faces appeared on oil lamps, pottery, and children's toys. They endorsed products. They gave interviews in the form of public appearances and processions. Rome had invented the celebrity athlete 2,000 years before ESPN. But behind the fame and the roar of the crowd, the gladiator carried something else entirely. Here is the final statistic that reframes everything. Modern historians estimate that during the height of the gladiatorial games, the death rate per bout was approximately 1 in 9. Not 1 in 2. Not a coin flip. 1 in 9. The Romans did not want their gladiators dead. A dead gladiator cannot fight again, cannot sell tickets again, cannot recoup the investment of 3 years of training. The missio, the mercy call, was granted far more often than cinema suggests. A fighter who performed with skill and courage even in defeat, he would frequently be spared by the crowd and the editor, the official presiding over the games. Survival was possible. Reputation was everything. And the crowd's opinion was the difference between life and death. This means gladiators were not simply fighting for survival. They were performing for it. Every movement, every decision, every display of courage or technique was a calculated appeal to 50,000 judges simultaneously. The pressure of that and the psychological weight is almost incomprehensible, and yet the best of them thrived. Some fought dozens of bouts. Some won their freedom, retired with wealth, and lived into old age. A few were so beloved that upon retirement, crowds rioted in protest. They were not just warriors, they were not just athletes, they were not just slaves. They were human beings placed inside the most extreme performance pressure system ever designed, and many of them found a way to master it. The Gladiator was not what Rome told you he was. He was not what Hollywood sold you. He was something more complicated, more human, and more disturbing than either version. He was engineered, studied, marketed, consumed, and the machinery that built him, the diet science, the psychological pressure, the crowd dynamics, the medical innovation, much of it still exists. Rebranded, refined, broadcast into every screen on Earth. We didn't leave the arena behind, we rebuilt it, and we filled the seats again.